Alright, so in the face of this Native American history, which includes so much turmoil and sorrow and pain over the past 50 years, over the past several hundred years, there really is a need for a community identity for American Indians, one that is not based in the Western urban identity, which was more thrust upon that community, but is based in their traditional community. And oral narratives are the method to provide that identity. And that is what I'm going to be talking about in this video. So, oral narratives provide a communal identity by transcending time and through that opposing Western culture, and also by creating a moral fabric which really sustains the Native American community. Okay, so transcending time. Oral narratives are passed down for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's a tremendous amount of time to really wrap your mind around. And the effect of that is just huge because by knowing oral narratives, Native Americans can know their heritage, their place of origin, their identity as a community, as a people. And it is critical to have this in order to resist the identity which during especially the 1950s, for example, President Eisenhower tried to thrust on them through the termination policy and by moving them into urban centers and by trying to Americanize this community. And this transcendence of time holds all of these traditions and all of these memories and maintains them. So this connection of one generation passing the stories on to the next generation, passing the stories on to the next generation, provides this link, provides this chain of identities through the ages, which is extremely important. And then also important to consider is that the effect that these oral narratives are not static. They do not stay the same. The same oral narrative which was told thousands of years ago and from which today's oral narratives may be drawn is not the same as the one that's actually being told today. There is a link between them, but they are not the same. As time changes, as there are new needs and new audiences, the story gradually shifts with each teller. A little bit here, perhaps a lot more there, and just a minuscule, tiny detail here, but each teller tells it to his audience personally, tells the audience what they need to know, what they need to hear, what they need in order to keep going and to sustain this community. So the oral narratives are really almost living entities in that they grow and they change and they are not fragile at all. Instead, they really have survived a lot of adversity and they have grown and thrived as a result of it. So, an aspect of that to consider is that we talked in the last video about all of that history, and all of that history is now being included in the oral narratives, as you have some of the further ago but still more modern history, such as the Trail of Tears and stories like that, being included now in the oral narrative tradition. So, an oral narrative I listened to online by Andrew Begay, I have the link in the notes, in it he talked about how his great grandmother went on what he called the Great Walk, where they were so starved, where they were so overburdened that they had no food and the soldiers would not give them food, and the mothers would chop off their own fingers in order to feed their children. And that story is awful. It has a truly gut-wrenching, terrible feel to it. But Andrew Begay mentioned that when his parents and his grandparents told him these stories, they told him, "We do not tell you these things that you may be angry. We tell you so you can remember, so that this can be a part of you, a part of us." And this adds into that communal feel as you have that aspect of this is what we have gone through, both hundreds of years ago and now, more presently. There is that aspect of community that is formed by having the story of us through the ages. So, oral narratives form community by transcending time. They also form community by having this overwhelming moral fabric of the society, which is really promoted through the oral narratives. So, an example of this would just be how oral narratives, they promote ideals and they promote roles of what you as a member of this community should be, what you as a member of this community should act like, how you are a part of us, and the expectations that are held of you as a result. So many of the Native American oral narratives have underlying meanings to them, which you can really see when you examine them, and which are very important if you really want to see the full story and not just the entertainment value, because there is more. Most oral narratives have underlying meaning and values which structure them underneath. So you have these stories being told by the storyteller, by your grandparents, by your parents, by your siblings, by your spouses, by your neighbor. All these stories are being told over and over again. They're kind of drilled into the society slowly and just all over. They just surround and they create this fabric of all these different threads which are there and present all the time. And as a result, you have a society which is very much sustained along the same moral and traditional grounds, as they are all hearing these stories as they grow up and as they are older. So for the children, it instills these beliefs. And then for the adults who are hearing these stories every year, and as they've heard them every year of their lives, it confirms those values, it confirms that identity, and it ingrains it even deeper and gives a sense of pride of this is who we are. So this moral component to it is very important. Now, as I mentioned before, much of the Native American community is now urban and in the cities. So for those who are in the cities and who may not have grown up on a reservation or in a direct tribe surrounded by their tribe's oral narratives, they still listen to these stories and they still hear them quite frequently. In fact, they may hear not just their tribes, but they may hear the pan-tribal oral narratives, and all of these become a sense of their identity, and it confirms it as an alternative to the identity they may have grown up with, to the identity that may have been thrust upon them. So this moral component is extremely important in contrast to the fractured, I-centered Western identity, because in the Western sense, in the American sense, it's often all about me and I and my iPod and me and you, and so there's more of a fractured sense, while the oral narratives instill a communal, this is our tradition that has been passed down through the generations, and this is what we believe in. So that is how oral narratives are important in what they instill and the role that they play. Next time we will discuss how they are important as literature, how they are important in their language aspects as well as their role.